Hello, everyone. This is host of this podcast feature known as Surprise Cast. Today's episode is a celebration of timeless songwriting, emotional honesty, friendship, and beautiful, sparkling melodies. Joining me are members of the Bluebells to explore this brand new album. This is the Bluebells, a collection of dazzling, wonderful 16 songs that captures the heart and spirit of one of Scotland's most beloved indie pop groups. We will also talk about memory, Glasgow in the early 80s, the unexpected longevity of this band's sound, and what it means when music continues finding new listeners later. Let us welcome Dave from the band. Dave, how are you doing?
Hi, W. Thank you. That was some introduction. I'm doing very well. Yeah. The last time I saw you was about 2 years ago. I think the last time we did your podcast. But we're very happy. Obviously, the record's just out just now in the UK and the world, I think. But we're very pleased with the album. 16 track. It's not a prog rock concept album, but it's got 16 songs on it.
Oh, and we will go deeper into some of these songs. David, I have a question for you. In terms of art, it could be music, theater, dance, movies, music. What's inspiring you right now?
It's brilliant, isn't it? You know, when you're just kind of immersed in so many ideas and, you know, obviously I love all forms of art, you know. My daughter got me tickets to go and see Waiting for Godot, you know, Citizens Theatre, which is a Glasgow theatre that's just reopened. It's an old Victorian theatre, beautiful. You know, love to go to arts exhibitions and photographic exhibitions and gigs. And we were playing last week, actually, last Saturday. It was the 10th anniversary of Last Night from Glasgow, which, as you know, is the label which our new album is on. So that was a 10th anniversary celebrating that record label. So lots of their artists were there playing live, you know. So it was just excellent because, you know, what you need to see it live, don't you? You know, especially music, you know, you can hear the record and love the record. But so Pearl Charles, for example, she was fantastic. She's from California and her band were just absolutely amazing. You know, I'd listened to some of their albums before that night, but when you just heard it live, you know, just unbelievable. And I think they're from Joshua Tree, California. But Pearl Charles and the band were absolutely brilliant and had a real good chat with them afterwards, you know, they were fantastic. And a whole host of bands that are on Last Night from Glasgow label, and it's very, very diverse, from Brontes to Sister John, you know, but really, really brilliant night. I go to gigs a lot.
You touched on some bands there that I really respect. And of course, Last Night from Glasgow, they do a hell of a job running that thing, yeah?
Well, that's it. It's a small record label. It's a kind of DIY record label, but brilliant, you know. And the roots of where we came from was like, you know, in Glasgow, there was little record labels sprouting up, you know, post-punk, you know, after punk, during punk and after punk. So that DIY culture is certainly something we've been kind of brought up with and had been inspired by other people or inspired by live groups that we saw as kids. But yeah, there's always been a really good culture of like zines, you know, fanzines, and stuff, very small scale, off-grid stuff, you know, which I love. And I know eventually these labels become on-grid, but there's something really exciting and you get the best stuff, you know, the best material and the richest, you know, kind of artists and sometimes obscure stuff that you wouldn't get on the mainstream channels initially.
You really do, and hats off to Ian Smith and the team over there. Let's talk about an album whilst growing up that totally shaped your perspective of music.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. One album. I suppose, you know, in our house we were brought up, even as young kids, listening to our older brothers and sisters' albums. But an album that was your own, you know, that reflected or that related to how you were, you know, at a young age, was certainly The Clash. You know, The Clash first album was just really brilliant. You just related to it, you know, as a teenager. I was probably about 14, I think, when I got that album. And they were just a brilliant band. And then you went to see The Clash live, you know, And I was a kid just loving all those songs and watching them and going, I want to do that. Obviously, the Clash were totally unique, but it was just that energy, incredible energy in the lyrics. It was political and it really related to a lot of the kind of emotions and the climate at the time, and certainly in the UK and certainly in Scotland. They were banned from London, but they totally hit the kind of zeitgeist of where we were,
Okay, so let's go to Glasgow and specific pockets of Scotland during that time. There was so much incredible music coming out of the 80s there. Glorious music. Obviously, you guys, Trash Can Sinatra's, Aztec Camera, Blue Nile. So I don't think I asked you this last time, but what is that fertile ground, that enriched ground in Scotland that really brought about these bands together?
It's amazing, isn't it? It's all very subjective, but yeah, there is that kind of core. I don't know if it's a Celtic thing or with their upbringing, I don't know, is it a kind of working class thing or, is it just is it a cultural, certainly a cultural thing, being from Scotland. But of course we were exposed to different styles of music. And it's always interesting because even although you're immersed in, a lot of music that's global, a lot of American music and Irish music and music from everywhere, what we could get anyway. Because I remember in those early days, I'd never heard of Bruce Springsteen, no idea who that was, or people like Boss Gags and, all these artists who were like big in America, but they didn't do anything here, especially at that time, or you couldn't really relate to them. But of course, as I'm saying, a lot of Scottish artists were brought up with quite a rich heritage of oral tradition, and the oral tradition being, often through song and storytelling, certainly storytelling. I think that's a big one. And you see that in the lyrics. Just kind of to answer your question, I really think we have that rich heritage of listening to stories, whether that's from parents or been at parties, your parents' parties and you're a child and you'd be allowed to stay up a bit later, if you did a turn, if you told a story or a poem, or sang a song, and Ken and I eventually got some songs together or cover songs, whatever, and that we would do. And I learned to play a bit of guitar. I've got 3 chords, but yeah, certainly that tradition, and then of course what you're listening to, what your older brother, because in our family there's 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5. Ken was next, and then we had another brother and 2 sisters. So, of course, in that house, they're all playing all this music, our older brother, Phil, is playing, the Velvet Underground, and when I was a young kid, you're thinking, listening to Lou Reed and thinking, well, that's really strange, you didn't quite get it lyrically or sonically, but you're kind of like, that's weird, that's strange, and obviously a couple of years later, you're like, well, that's fantastic, So you listen to their records, and one of our sisters was right into disco music, and then you're loving that as well. And then you get through that dilemma of thinking, but hold on, I'm into punk rock, can I really like disco, and soul music, yeah, and a bit of jazz, and a bit of, AOR rock, is that allowed? But even things like, yeah, I mean, so many, the Birds and, bands like that, very melodic, and obviously Dylan. My mother played a lot of Dylan records, and from our tradition, cultural tradition, there's a lot of Irish music, in the house, and a lot of poetry and a lot of storytelling. So that kind of, to get back to your question, and there was a guy Dominic Behan, who's Brendan Behan's brother, the Irish playwright, Brendan, and Dominic was a playwright as well and a poet, and became a friend of my mum and dad's. So often Dominic was at the parties. We ended up co-writing songs with Dominic. So Dominic, Irish playwright and poet. So he would be reciting, and he would be reciting loads of poetry, not just his own, but, a lot of really interesting, Celtic poetry and storytelling. And again, I think that really weaves, and it's got it's really within that root of what you're talking about. Yes. This whole range of bands and artists from Scotland, but there's a kind of a root there that's, linked, connected.
And I've heard that before. And I've also heard this, David, from James Hackett of the band The Orchids. Because I asked him kind of the similar question, and he goes, well, William, that's easy. And I said, really? He goes, yeah. It always fucking rains in Scotland. It's always...
There's that as well. Escapism. Yeah, we want to hear songs about Laurel Canyon and the sunshine and beautiful escapes and islands.
Today, you said you were tired and lonely. I wrote this song just to warn you. The life you thought you lost.
So I want to talk about identity, because I think that's really important when it comes to obviously the beginning of a band and all that and how it's evolved over time. But before we do that, I want to read to you some special quotes here, and then I'll ask you a question. Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters says this: music is about being true to who you are. David Bowie said this: I think the most important thing is to find your own voice. And finally, Prince said this: your identity is your most valuable instrument. Protect it. Okay, so those are some heavy hitters in the music industry. So David, tell the listeners and me, when do you feel like your band, the Bluebells, began to really develop your identity?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so obviously Ken and I had been in like a school kind of punk band, and we used to do a lot of cover songs and stuff and some Ramones songs and things. So we had all those influences. But as far as the Bluebells is concerned, yeah. So then, Bob had asked me to join his band as the drummer. So I think I was the first person to join the Bluebells. And so Bob was the main songwriter, Bobby Bluebell, Robert Hodgins. So he had a whole bunch of songs, So it was kind of like joining his band, I think he had a band before called the Oxfam Warriors, didn't quite work out. So he was kind of like searching for the right musicians and stuff. So I joined his band. So the identity there was, initially I was, playing drums with Robert's band, but I was doing harmonies, alongside. And we used to just meet in Robert's bedroom, and he'd play his songs, and then a pal of ours, Russell, who played guitar and came from the kind of punk scene, I suggested Russell, so he came along. So then the three of us were going through Bob's songs. But of course, as the Bluebells evolved, of course, we're all starting to write, after about a year and a half, it was the postcard scene, of course, that we were aiming for, putting a record out, postcard, and we knew Alan Horn. Bob was a good friend of Alan's, and, obviously Orange Juice and all that. We used to rehearse. We used to support those guys and stuff and do a lot of gigs and Aztec Camera. But anyway, so they were, amazing, but your own voice, So we had, I suppose we were the Bluebells were the kind of poppier side, maybe more the Monkees, side of that kind of postcard and post-punk. And it was a mixture of lots of things, but it had that energy of punk, a lot of it. So with Bob's songs, but gradually you started to find your identity and your role within that band, Ken came up. Ken was in London for a year and a half, and then when Ken came back up to Glasgow, I was saying to Ken, "There's a great scene up here. You need to get involved." So Ken joined the Bluebells, but he played harmonica in one song, bar harmonica, and then he started to do some backing vocals because it was Bob's band, But gradually, I think Bob realised he's a great singer, So obviously it became Bob and Ken were the lead singers, and I was doing a lot of harmonies with them, and the Bluebells evolved. But it's interesting when your identity comes out, and I was very young, so I probably wasn't that assertive as far as, hey, here's my songs, I've got some songs, But of course you're all influencing that song and that track, and you're in the studio and you're adding loads to it. So there's multiple identities, to make that record. Even though it was Bob's songs originally, and then
multiple identities. And I'd learned that in terms of songwriting process, for some artists like Tom York of Radiohead, during the songwriting process for his group, perhaps his solo work, he feels possessed. So for your band, in terms of songwriting, could you give us a little bit of how that goes? And that can be compared to back in the past or in this new album.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? I suppose Bob had a really defined way of writing and he had very defined influences, And when he saw us, Ken and I, in our punk band, when I was 14, Ken was 15, 16, he was like, well, yeah, I want some of that, just that kind of energy, the kind of raw energy. And obviously, as a drummer, I was self-taught, you're kind of making it up, by going to see bands, I remember going to see Captain Beefheart. And I have to admit, at the time I didn't really know who Captain Beefheart was, but we won, my cousin, John Quigley, and I won 2 tickets and it was on a radio show. And it was like, what's Captain Beefheart's real name? And my cousin got it. It's like, okay. So I'm going, who's Captain Beefheart? So we won 2 tickets to go and see. So that was great because obviously we knew about punk, we knew about this, but we weren't that widely, exposed or that widely experienced in a lot of off the wall, more abstract stuff. So going to that gig blew my mind, actually, Captain Beefheart, like, that's astonishing. And just the way they play and that kind of eccentricity and so creative. And it was just a mind blowing gig. But back to your question, it was about, remind me, you're talking about when
the songwriting process.
Yeah.
Back in the day or now and how it's varied and shifted.
Yeah, I think really distinctive. I think it's interesting because, Ken had a couple of songs, early Bluebells, and I had some songs, and then, gradually Ken and I started to write together. So we had a band called the McCluskey Brothers, after, the Bluebells demise, and we wrote a lot of stuff. But yeah, individually, we all had songs and very distinctive styles, So it's like, how's that going to work if it's like, because initially it was Bob's band and it's Bob's songs, that had quite a distinctive shape to them, So it was like, right, okay. Hey, do you want to listen to my songs? Will that work? So gradually our voices started to emerge within the Bluebells. And I would say it's really created the sound of the Bluebells over the years, because obviously the three main people in the Bluebells who are writers, as far as songwriting is concerned, is, Bobby, Ken and myself. So I think that shaped the scope of the Bluebells, because a lot of people think, okay, what do you know about the Bluebells? Young at heart, okay, it's a bit poppy, it's got a bit of a country poppy kind of, side to it or influence to it. But there's much more, there's political stuff that we brought in, and it's a lot of Ken's stuff. And as I say, when we were writing with Dominic Behan, the Irish poet, we were using elements of poetry and sort of political topics and polemic in a lot of the songs. You're like, will that work in the Bluebells? So even things like in our first album, The South Atlantic Way, which was a cry against the Falklands War and against the Argentinians, which was horrendous. And we were like, not in our name. No, not in our name. We don't support this in any way, and detested Margaret Thatcher and the Tories. So those voices, those elements of our voices were coming into the Bluebells, those elements of politics, and whilst retaining that melodic, and big crescendo choruses.
Would you be up for discussing a little bit about drum playing?
Yeah.
Okay. I love speaking with. Give us a little bit of insight into the kit. Now, I'm going to ask you a very specific question. I want you to imagine you're at the drum kit and you're about to play something. What specifically about that drum kit, hi-hat, snare, tom, ride cymbal, that you love hitting?
That's a very good question. Gosh. It can be a cymbal, it can be that brash, percussion of a cymbal, or is it the hi-hat sometimes, building up a little kind of 16s kind of feel and kind of intricate pattern. It all depends, very subjective. It depends on the song and depends on the feel. But yeah, sometimes it's that anticipation. If you're doing a drum fill and you're building up and building it up, and it's like, bah, 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 it's the bass drum and the cymbals really come into it to give you that peak. I mean, I'm not a kind of big sort of muso, drummer, kind of prog rock type person. I mean, as in drums it was very DIY to me, I'm self-taught. But for me, it was always about, obviously, influences, and going to see bands like the Buzzcocks, for example, John Mayer, the drummer of the Buzzcocks. I loved as a kid. I absolutely loved it. I'm like, wow, going to see them, loving the Buzzcocks songs, but loving his drumming, because sometimes it was often quite busy, but it totally worked, that energy and that. And I think I was quite kind of hyper, sort of 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and it's like, get that energy out, but using it without ruining the song, without destroying the song and overplaying, But so that energy, I think I had, but it's like when you influenced by other drummers, you're like, oh, that's brilliant, right? Okay. You can't be that person or that drummer, but it's nice when you can transfer some of those skills and aspire. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And for me, the drummer that really caught my attention in the early 80s, Stuart Copeland of The Police.
Yeah. I mean, he's brilliant. I mean, I remember seeing The Police. It's my mic still on, isn't it? Yeah. I remember seeing The Police at Glasgow Apollo, and at first I was a bit skeptical because I thought, white reggae, I'm not sure how that sits. Obviously I love reggae and dub and real rootsy, authentic reggae, absolutely, and ska and all that. But the first heard, the Police records, but went to see them live, and they, they were amazing live. But I was probably spent most of the time, watching Stuart Copeland. That's right. And I always remember him saying, when he started to listen to reggae and dub, he's like, it's all upside down. It's all the wrong way around. And he's absolutely right. Because where you want to put the bass drum, you think reggae, okay. It's like, no, the bass drum doesn't go in the one. So the three. So everything's all upside down. It's a great way of rewiring your brain. I mean, playing the drums is a great way of rewiring your brain, as you know. Playing any instrument is unbelievable what it does to the brain and connectivity. But learning something which is not instinctive at the start, as in another cultural style of playing an instrument or playing drums, like Stuart Copeland playing, reggae and dub. Obviously, the guy's an incredible, musician, of course, and very complex musician, absolutely. But I thought that was quite funny, just the way he was talking about, whoa, he found it mind-blowing trying to figure out, where the beats land.
Yeah.
He got it pretty quickly.
I've spoken with other drummers about tuning.
Yeah.
And how important tuning the drum kit is. And I've also heard from other drummers, they don't spend a lot of time on the tuning. So for you, what was your approach, or is your approach?
Yeah, that is interesting. It's very individual. Yeah. It's funny talking about tuning. I remember there was a kind of wave of drummers, a lot of the postcard bands, I know Aztec Camera, Dave Ruffy that played with Aztec Camera had rototoms, and they're so 80s, aren't they, rototoms, Yeah. But I remember thinking, right, I've got to get a set of them, right, I need to get a set of those, But in tuning, the thing about rototoms, you could actually tune it by turning. It was on a rotation.
Oh,
the rim, you actually turned the rim while you played it, so you could do sometimes a lot of kind of reggae bands and Latino bands would use them and stuff. So you're actually tuning it, in real time. But yeah, to the root of the question, very individual. I mean, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing in the early days, to tell you the truth, but I did have a really good Gretsch kit. I've still got another little Gretsch kit, sort of 1950s Gretsch kit with beautiful kind of grain fiber skins, So there's something about those kind of drum skins that they acclimatise to whatever room you're in, So the temperature of the room, or is it a kind of, is it a bigger gig with tons of lights and, heats? And so then obviously that's going to change, alter the pitch often, of the kit. But sometimes that's okay because it's almost like the kit acclimatising to its environment, or is it an old mouldy church, which is dank and a bit damp, Sometimes the drums go a bit flat, if there's too much moisture in there, so you're tuning it up. But gradually, I think when I got into the studio, I started to figure out, right, okay, just the pitches, the range of pitches that you're going to use across a kit, whether it's a 4-piece, a 5-piece. But I always loved drums that ring a lot. And of course, in the studio, that's not good. As in a lot of producers, as you know, oh no, they want to stick cigarette packets on top of your snare drum and before you know it, you've got sponges, gaffer tape to your toms. You're like, no! So that was always a bit of a challenge, to try to get around that. Where's the compromise? Because then your drums often in the studio And when you're playing a kit like that, you're really not getting much feedback off it, So I always love drums that ring a bit, So you go, especially floor tom. I love a big ringy floor tom.
You had mentioned musical therapy. I know there are people listening to this podcast thinking to themselves, well, I've heard that term before, but I don't really understand it. Could you clarify and provide a little bit details on what that means?
I mean, there's so many areas, right? So music therapy. Obviously, there's psychotherapy. I've not been involved in psychotherapy. Psychotherapeutic intervention, and it's clinical. But of course, that, therapy can match people's specific needs, especially in a clinical setting. I've obviously gone and done certain courses and stuff and diplomas and, related to what I do in work or what I've done for the odd 25 years. So it really is, sometimes it's a referral, it could be a child or, a person coming, being referred, and it's that person has delayed speech, for example. It might be like a 5-year-old boy, who's not using verbal language, but there's energies in there. And so music is unbelievable because, as we know, you can be in this aesthetic space, but you can be in this space, with an instrument, sharing music, looking at movement as musical, even people's movement, the way they breathe, even the way people walk across a room, whether it's a child or an adult. There's that kind of energy, and you're kind of attuning. So you're attuning to that person's way of being. So straight away, you're in a good equal space, or you're in a space that can match a lot of people's needs, because it's not speech therapy where you're okay, the outcome is that you will be speaking by at the end of 6 weeks. But even using their voice, somebody using their voice or singing, or they might not even regard it as structured singing, but there's so many elements of music, whether it's the rhythm, the timing and the tempo, or is it the voice, is it the breathing? And we've all got our own natural tempo as well. And we've all got our own way of improvising, even the way that we sit in a chair, or drink a cup of tea. So you start to attune to that individual, and obviously if it's children, even if it's adults, it's about playing, that very appropriate play. And music gives us this unbelievable potential, so many, multiple ways of playing, appropriately. Because some people think, play, that's just for kids and children. You're like, no, that's what music is, just all play. It's all based on that, and improvisation is all based on play and experimentation. But when you working with, say, like a child who's quite isolated, so you can bring that child out of isolation by sharing, that interest, or sharing, some, object, whether it's a drum or, is it a guitar, or is it a song, or is it just maybe, as I say, the best instruments are the body and the voice. It doesn't rely on sitting at a piano. A lot of the old school music therapists, it's sitting at the piano and playing music to allow this child to find their voice. But sometimes that's too dominant. You're the musician and this person is the passenger. You're filling aspects into this empty vessel, whereas I much prefer that equality. Two people in a room and you're just finding ways of finding meaning, and connection. It's all about connection, and it's all about emotional expression. Emotion is absolutely crucial. Meet so many people who have no outlet for that emotion, even if it's anger, even if it's or excitement, or passivity. There's always ways within music, so many potential avenues to explore.
Sometimes when it's quiet, I go up on the roof. I look down all around and watch the city move.
I want to give you a little scenario, and then I have a really important question to ask you. When I was teaching 9 and 10-year-olds, there was a boy in my classroom that came to me with a lot of support. He was severely autistic. And his parents said to me at the beginning of the school year, William, basically, good luck. So for about a month, I tried everything to keep him involved somehow, some way, but yet allowed him his space. And often I would play music in the classroom. We would sing, we would dance, we would stretch to it. We would learn lyrics, blah, blah, blah. He was having none of it until finally one day I put on the Beatles. It changed the entire trajectory of his school year with me. That summer after he left my classroom, his mother sent me an email of him playing the drums to a Beatles song at a music camp. There is no way in hell they thought that was ever going to happen. I'm not taking full credit for that. I just want to piggyback off of what you said, and here comes the question: the power of music, art, and expression, and how therapeutic. Can you tell us a success story, a story that lingers in your mind regarding music therapy?
An example, I was just thinking, I actually have a song on the last Bluebells album, the Bluebells in the 21st Century. And that song is called She Rises. And I've never really told this story before, but basically She Rises is a song about this incredible young woman that I worked with. I worked for an organisation called Send Scotland. So this young woman, I started working, I was only in the job maybe a year or two, so I was quite freshman, finding my feet, so to speak, So, so I went to meet this young woman, let's call her Lisa. I'll just change the name. So I went to meet Lisa in her home. And the whole premise was that Lisa was very isolated, really withdrawn, very complex needs. So sometimes you're looking at the kind of clinical report, and often I don't want to see that. You just want to meet that person so you're not loaded with any conceived ideas or information. So it was all about that Lisa is very, very hard to reach. Very, very complex needs. You would get all these expressions like severely mentally retarded, expressions that wouldn't be used now, but you're getting these labels about this person that you're just about to meet. So I would go to Lisa's house. She had support workers in the house, supported housing, supported living. So I would go to her house with my little bag of instruments, see what works. Oh, no response. No. So, but gradually then I realized it's about trust. It's about spending time, with that person, and sometimes we would just be listening to music or just using touch, the hands, and maybe just rocking to a piece of music. But I think it was about session 4, I heard this incredible sound and I was like, whoa, unbelievable. So Lisa just came out with this like barrage crescendo of just so melodic. It was like listening to something like a classically trained, singer. It's just like this voice. I'm like, where did that come from? Kind of operatic scale. I couldn't even attempt to sing, right? But this soaring voice, unbelievable. From this kind of small girl sitting in the corner, it was just kind of like, right, okay, I'm ready. She came out with this and I'm like, oh, that's astonishing. So then I gradually brought my guitar out and then she kind of allowed, because at first it was like, when I made any sound, I'm kind of invading her space, but gradually that trust and the relationship built up and then, okay. And Lisa was blind and she would reach out, okay, and then feel the guitar and then the smile. And then it became reciprocal, it's co-creative. I'm listening to her sounds and like, it wasn't all structured scales. Often it was just big emotional kind of outbursts, but incredibly musical. So I would try to accompany that with guitar, sometimes my own voice, not mirroring her voice, but just maybe an accompanying harmony. But sometimes just guitar sitting on the floor. She liked to sit in lotus position. But this rich, melodic voice, it was unbelievable. And then I could see that's her emotional, outlet, and her instrument is this astonishing voice. And she needs as many opportunities, regular, to use that. Because often she was sitting mute, just silent, and very withdrawn at music. That's it. That's the outlet. It's like you're saying, I'm not coming and go, oh, that was me. And I released her voice. She'd worked with other people in the past, but it was just incredible to experience that, to hear her voice. And then I worked with her for years, many years actually, and we developed loads of stuff and we did recordings and she did some performances. From somebody that had no confidence, at all and wouldn't know how to relate. It was a very isolating. Obviously she had, there was kind of complex communication needs, but it wasn't reciprocal. Originally it was something she did on her own, but didn't share it. But then when you shared it, it expanded, the voice and the melodies, and then I could start walking into the room and sing one of her melodies and you would just see the smile, the laughter, because she knows, that's one of mine. That's one of mine, and I'm talking about original, improvised, vocal melodies that she's singing. Sometimes she would sing well-known songs, like Beatles songs, whatever. You're like, oh, what's that tune again? And she was non-verbal. So it was all just, vocal expression and all these beautiful contouring vocal melodies without the words. But incredible.
Feeling through her fingertips, singing in her sound, retracing all the places she's been, the passages of people and erosions of time remain unspoken.
I never knew that, and it's such a gorgeous last track, and the beautiful guitar work. It's all making sense to me. Man, I'm getting a little teary-eyed.
That's all, not at all. And I'm not being, pretentious. It's very simple. It's got a simple metaphor in it. The chorus talks about she comes from the island, but it's just that metaphor, as in she's so isolated.
Yes.
Actually, when that connection is made, you're like,
yeah.
You're having this incredible experience, and she's sharing with you her voice, but crucially her emotion, and that's laced throughout the whole song. The levels of emotion and articulacy, actually, that she expressed. Often I was sitting going, "Whoa, how do I accompany that?"
Thank you for giving us a little bit understanding of what music therapy and how it serves a purpose in your life. And I'm sure you are spectacular at it, and people that have worked with you obviously benefited. So I love hearing those stories. Let's talk about this brand new album. Yeah.
So the new album, and it's a different story. Sorry, I haven't spoken about that. And then we're moving on to the new album, which is like, we just went into the studio 2 days. We recorded 16 tracks in 2 days. This is the new one that's out just now. This is the Bluebells. And yeah, because we thought, right, because we've all got loads of songs and we've got such a great band. We've got Campbell Owens from Aztec Camera on bass. And Douglas MacIntyre. Douglas has played with Love and Money and so many different bands. And we have, who have I missed out? Mick Slavin. And we've got Mick Slavin as a fantastic musician, brilliant guitarist. And, Mick used to play with us on and off in the early days. And Mick was in Bourgie, and he's played with Deacon Blue and lots of different Glasgow bands, And Douglas has played with the Fire Engines. And so this whole gang of musicians that we've always, hung out with, but it's like having these rich gems in your toolcase, So the quality of this album is we've written together, So with those, all those musicians, so Ken, Bob, myself, and Mick and Douglas and Campbell, we went into little groups and we just co-wrote songs together, little partnerships, and we co-wrote songs together. So it's a really genuine, authentic, sound of the band. We recorded it, I say, in 2 days. We've spent days later adding little layers and stuff and some harmonies, but basically it's a studio album, but it's as live as, it sounds like the way that we sound live in gigs, which is what I really like about this album.
Let's take a listen to the very first track. I love this track because, and I say this with great respect, when I first heard it, I'm like, they're the birds. There's that jingle fucking jangle that I love so much. And it just jumps right in to the album. And here we go. It's called Sing Like Little Birds Sing.
You say that you got everything you want, so what would you have me do? You say that our world is falling apart, so what would you have me do now? What would you have me do? The times won't change, they stay the same. If there's a doubt, just work it out. Sing, sing, sing like little birds sing. Sing, sing, sing like little birds.
Okay, so I just praised the song, loved the song. Tell us a little about anything you want with regards to this first track.
But on that song, Sing Little Birds, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful song that Bob wrote that song. I think, did Bob do that song with Douglas? And it's gorgeous. Yeah, it does have that kind of birdsy, and we were thinking about some of the early influences, that we had, some of the kind of Americana, American stuff that we loved, and just that really rich melody and the 12-string guitar, and, whilst still sounding, like a band from Glasgow. So, yeah, I mean, it's got a beautiful soaring chorus, and it was great when Bob presented that song to us, because you're like, oh yeah. Itching, I was itching to put a harmony on it, vocal harmony, because I thought that'd be really nice with that, yeah. And just the feel of it, we kind of knocked it about between us. But yeah, I think it's really captured. I think this album has really it's really captured the sound of the band in a really kind of rich way, without being over layered or overproduced.
And that's what I love. And there's another track here I want to talk about and get your feelings on it. And this is a song, if my dad were still alive, it is without certain, it is a guarantee. If he heard this song, See What the Morning Brings, I know he would absolutely smile. And he was actually a pretty good singer. I would hear it in the car on our road trips. So let's take a listen to track number 8 from this gorgeous album. This is The Bluebells.
Breathing is what I'd do if I was you. I'll talk, is that okay? There's always another way. The letdowns and the crazy days are part of making you, but that's no way to carry on. Don't let the lovesick get you down. See what the morning brings. Stop everything. See what the morning brings. See what the morning brings. I'm not trying to simplify.
All right, David, take it away. Any insights, analysis on this one?
Oh, so I'm glad you chose that one. Okay, W. And that's one of mine. So that was a co-write. As I was telling you about the co-writes, we all wrote together in pairs to complete that 16-track compilation or collation. So Douglas MacIntyre, guitarist, had some chords. So he played me some chords. And he's like, got some ideas with this. The bridge can maybe go like this. And I thought it sounds lovely. I think you're playing it on the 12-string. And he basically said, would you like to write some lyrics around that? And it's funny because I don't have a lot of experience in that. Usually if I write a song, I write a song. It's, I've got the chords, I've got the whole structure. But it's a really interesting way of working, you know, when Douglas is like that, right? Just the structure of it, lovely. It's got a loose, kind of folky, hasn't it, kind of feel about it, you know. Something quite Celtic about it as well as being slightly, you know, kind of countryish. And so, and it was something that I was going through at the time, family-wise, you know. There's two, you know, you can interpret your own meaning, of course, from that song. But it did have this brightness about the chords, you know, and you're thinking something quite summery, you know, and it just gave me this feeling of the morning, you know, just those chords and the kind of structure of it, where the chorus is and where the, you know, it's probably only got about 4 chords, maybe 5, but beautiful, rich, kind of uplifting feel of it, you know. So, and I just thought, yeah, morning, see what the morning brings. And it's just got a little narrative of, you know, relationship with my daughter and I, actually. And then there's some, so it's quite emotive, you know.
Tell us, if you don't mind, a story whilst making this album. Maybe there was a happy accident. Maybe there was a song that you guys could not get right until something happened.
As I say, we were in the studio and we recorded this album. It was an old council library building, probably 1980 of, you know, architecture, kind of looks a bit bland from outside. And Stuart McLeod, it's his studio, you know, and fantastic producer. He's done an amazing job on this record. He's got amazing ears, Stuart, but he's a musician, obviously. So it's great working with Stuart because, you know, so one of those guys you just trust because he'll say, I don't think that's working. How about this? You know, and he'll put his input into it, you know, in a really beautiful way because you listen to it and go, you're right. So even when I've got my little Gretsch, I've got a 1950s Gretsch, you know, like American Gretsch recording kit. It's a beautiful little champagne. The finish is like bronze champagne, you know, the glittery little cabaret 50s kit. Anyway, it sounds beautiful. So when we were going out the studio, I was like, yeah, I'll take the Gretsch, and you know, and I hadn't actually been in the studio yet. I hadn't been in the building. Some of the other guys had been in the building. So the day we arrive, I've got the kit, and then I go in, and then Stuart, the producer, is saying, he said, this is my in-house kit that I've got set up. He said, obviously you can use your own kit, but he's like, this has got a beautiful sound, you know? And Stuart's not a drummer, but he does play lots of instruments. But he's, you know, this kit in this big live room that he's got, you know, it just sounded unbelievable. So I sat down and I went, let's try it. And it was just unbelievable, this beautiful, beautiful sound. And you're talking about tuning. He had this all beautifully tuned. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, yeah, I'll use that kit. So my little 1950s Gretsch kit, yeah, leave that there. It just sounded astonishing. And it was, like I was saying earlier, about a drum kit that's acclimatized to the space. And it was very much part of the space, this drum kit, you know. Even the cymbals, I'm like, normally I would be like, yeah, but I want one cymbal. It's like, actually the tone of them. So it's his ears. He's got this kit all beautifully tuned. In the big live room, it had a lovely big natural reverb. And of course, I didn't really want to do a record that sounds like Phil Collins, but there was some lovely, you know, kind of ambience to the kit and that way of playing, you know, because we were doing it pretty much live, the album, you know, I kind of wanted to take my headphones off, you know, because I just wanted to, because the sound of this drum kit in this room, that's, you know, this big live room, it was like Abbey Road or something, you know, as I say, from this 1980s ex-library building, the way that he had this kitted out is beautiful. It's like Abbey Road inside. And obviously all these beautiful mics and stuff. So when I started to play that, I thought, okay. So then you start to play the tracks to the sound of the kit, to the sound of the room. And obviously that kind of influences, something that influences the tempos, you know, because you're getting this lovely live ambience from the room. And then at the edge, you know, around the room and the circumference are the rest of the musicians, you know. So we did the track Dream On, and that was one of these tracks we weren't sure how we were going to do. Campbell had done a little demo of it. So Campbell Owens had written, you know, the music of this piece, and it was slightly kind of dubby, you know, had a slight kind of dub reggae feel of it. And of course we thought, how's that going to fit? Because we're not going to, you know, just stick in a reggae track. We're not a reggae band, but just the kind of feel of it had that kind of slightly dub feel. We thought, how we're going to do this. And he had a little demo that he played, and the demo on it, I thought, the drums sound great on that. And it was just programmed. He just programmed the drums, on a little drum machine or something, or a drum app. But I was like, I can't really play like that, and I love what the drum machine's doing. I think you should just use that. And just the tempo of it and stuff. I thought, that's beautiful. I was like, just transport that, just export that into the, into the desk, into the system, and use that. But Campbell was like, no, I know that you can play this, and it wasn't that it was complicated, but there's just something about the tempo, and it was just slightly lazy, and I thought, right, okay, I know exactly. And you don't want to be sitting with a cowbell, So obviously, I use some click tracks in the studio. That's fine. Can play with that. But there was something about the feel that you had on his demo that I thought, I don't want to lose that, So we just had a few run throughs, and he's like, that's it. Campbell would say, you're just pushing a little bit, or you're just push just to get the feel right, and we eventually go out. He said, that's it. Let's just record. And I'm like, you sure? So I was a wee bit self-doubting because I loved, as I say, can I get that feel, that he's got in the demo? So we did it all live, and it was, the live drum kit and stuff. But it was just, and again, using that ambience of the room really helped me kind of walk into that kind of feel, And there's a lot of space. It's a big spatial track, and obviously
that's it. You know what it is? There's fucking great atmosphere to that song. That's it.
Yeah, that's the sound of that one.
Yeah, and I think some people who are so familiar with your music might go, wait, this isn't what I'm used to. I like the stretching, but I love the simplicity of that tune. And that little bit of groove just constantly threaded throughout.
Yes. And another thing I was very proud of, is I brought my dulcimer. I play hammer dulcimer. In fact, you were talking about the Trash Can Sinatras earlier on. So obviously, they're friends of ours. And I played with the Trash Cans for a wee while, just maybe about a year and a half, 2 years, did a lot of gigs with them. And I recorded on one of their albums. I think I'm on about 10 tracks on it, a Happy Pocket. So on a Happy Pocket, the hammer dulcimer, So if people out there know what hammer dulcimer is, a lot of people won't. It's a beautiful instrument. You hear it in a lot of, there's a great British composer, John Barry, who used a lot of hammer dulcimer on his film scores, film themes, TV themes. The hammer dulcimer is often used in spy movies, James Bond movies when they're somewhere exotic. Or it's the Iron Curtain, beyond the Iron Curtain. Sort of minor scales. It's just this beautiful, really unique sound, the instrument, So I've always loved hammer dulcimer, but I played on Trash Cans. Anyway, when we were recording this album, Campbell said, I think this track could really work with, they could really use the hammer dulcimer because it's so kind of spatial, the track. And of course, we brought the dulcimer in, and the sound of the dulcimer in that big chamber that I'm telling you about, this sonic chamber, it sounds absolutely beautiful. So, and it was interesting because I did a couple of takes, but there's a lot of things that didn't work because this instrument rings forever. Oh, the sustain of it's huge, But then I just started to play this little, so I'm just kind of jamming about, improvising a bit, listening to the track with the headphones to see what would work, whatever. And, the beauty of Stuart will just record you when you're just tuning up. And it's like, I wasn't right. I was only tuning up, but he's recording, But in a way, that's great, because he actually got some really good bits and pieces that I was just kind of jamming with. I wasn't quite ready. He's got it, That was one thing. If I could just flick back, I wish the Trash Cans had done that, on the Happy Pocket, because I remember a whole night, like 1 p.m. till about 8 a.m. the next morning, and they were like going for take after take after take, and I'm like, and they always said, why don't you play that thing, the first thing you did? Did you not record it?
So, you don't have it.
I would spend ages getting ready to, and obviously I'm putting a lot of my own input in there and ideas, but some of it was like, just follow that guitar line. Okay, that's fine. Paul's guitar line. But quite often they wouldn't take the early takes. which were the best. Anyway, so Stuart is recording as I'm just kind of warming up with the headphones, listening to the track with this hammer dulcimer, my two beaters, and all the strings. It's got 80 strings on it. So there was a little stick in the bridge. I don't want to sound muso, but in the bridge part of the dulcimer, you get the staccato sound, you know. So the kind of ringy, sustaining sound of it in the main cavity of the instrument, it didn't really work. It was almost like too much echo, too much reverb going on. So when I moved it over to, it's a bit like on a guitar, you know, you've got that little bridge where the strings go to, you know, where they're pinned down. And if you pluck that, you're getting this kind of atonal, you know, and it's quite staccato. So it's got a section like that on the dulcimer.
You come to haunt me, you come to taunt me. In my dreams it's out of sight. In my dreams it is the same scene. I'm late home once again. I tried to find you, the house is empty. I'm home alone. I bought you carnations from the petrol station to brighten up our home. Dream on, dream on. I dream of you. I'll be coming home. I won't be very long. Then I can sing my song about the dream that I had last night. I'll get there very soon, be howling at the moon. Come hear my little tune about the dream that I had last night.
I want to read a quick little something here before we wrap this up. This comes from Maximum Volume in terms of the writer's feelings on this album. He says this, I have to say I really love this album. It felt like catching up with an old friend who you don't see very often, and the ease of being in their company. This 50-odd minutes was like medicine that alleviates all your ailments and will improve your quality of life. I suggest you imbibe it regularly. And then, you know, there's a gentleman that I have to give him a shout out. That is Stephen Schnee.
Steve's great. What a great guy.
All the support and love, not just your band. I know how much he loves your band, but so many bands that are well known and so many bands that are totally underappreciated. And with Steve's work, all the videos that he's done over the years, all the love, soul, and passion he's put into reviewing and speaking with musicians. I know he's a big admirer of the music. And I'm going to read something here that he wrote on his Substack here with regards to the new album. And he says this, I love it. He goes, whilst listening to This Is the Bluebells, it occurred to me that this may be the most consistent Bluebells album yet. Instead of dipping their toes into a myriad of styles, they stick to sounding exactly like the Bluebells, which is a truly wonderful thing. And he goes on and on and on. So really,
I thought it was beautiful to read that. You know, it was just so articulate, and it really chimed with us when we read that. So we're like, that's kind of exactly what we were trying to do. You know, we were trying to achieve, not try and sound like the Bluebells from 1981, but really try to kind of capture what the Bluebells are. You know, what is that sound? What are those influences, that melting pot, you know? But he really nailed it. You know, Steve, he's great and really articulate, and just the passion of the way that he writes. He loves those bands and those albums. But it's great to be one of those bands and some of those records that he is waxing lyrical about in a really genuine, emotional way. It's amazing. It's brilliant to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, he speaks from the heart. Okay. Are you ready to wrap it up with some fun questions, rapid fire?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Just do the best you can. In your mind, in your opinion, an underappreciated Bluebells song.
Do you know, it's funny, talking about Steve Schnee, there's a wee connection there to that question, because I remember Steve kind of writing and, you know, saying to us, he's like, he said, I can't believe all I ever said was the B-side. B-side. He's like, that's a hit record. I wish we'd had Steve working for the record label.
A concert the Bluebells performed in where something went wrong and you thought, holy shit, how are we going to get through this?
Of course, that's a good one. That is a good one. Well, I do remember one we were touring. We were kind of like about 3 months into a tour. And just, as a drummer, I remember like, your tendon and that muscle there, and, that's like, obviously you've got your stick and you're gripping onto the drumstick. And I just remember my left hand, halfway through a set, and halfway through a song, just my muscle just went, and I'm like, I can't hold a stick anymore. I thought, what's going on? I thought I was having a stroke. I mean, I was quite young at the time. I was probably only about 17 at the time, and we're touring. I think we were in Spain, and I'm like, what's going on? And my hand just gave up, and I'm like, so managed to get through the song playing with one hand, and the roadie had to gaffer tape the drumstick to my hand, something like that, like a claw. I've got this claw, this claw, with this tape around it, just like really crazy, but managed to get through that. But yeah.
Tea or coffee?
Oh, that's a good question. See, I'm ambidextrous, wrong word, but I like both, depending on the mood.
How can people find your music?
Well, it's on all platforms now, but if people, go online and they look for Last Night from Glasgow. Last Night from Glasgow is the independent label that we are through. But of course, we're pretty well distributed, but you can contact the label or mainstream music shops. I suppose if you're outside the UK, then, obviously you can go to major distributors, on Amazon and things, but probably a good idea to contact Last Night from Glasgow, and then they do shipping and all that, if you're buying it from, anywhere across the world outside the UK. But yeah, it is in all main platforms. And of course, it's Spotify, and if people want to have a wee taster before they buy the record. But it's on CD and it's also on vinyl. Sounds amazing in the vinyl, I have to say. The sleeve, it's got a beautiful sleeve that Bobby designed. Bobby, before he started the Bluebells, was a graphic designer. So he's still got that kind of, those skills. So it's really beautifully, tastefully wrapped, I have to say. The sleeve looks amazing. Even the little CD sleeve, it's like, whoa, it's very tasteful. And obviously it's brazen, this is the Bluebells, it's in the album.
David McCluskey, thank you.
Thank you, W. Really enjoyed that. Pleasure.
You are always such a pleasure to speak with, and thank you for all your time and your insights and stories. Always, always, my ears perk up and smile big time when I hear them for you. I'm going to wrap up this conversation with a few quotes. We're not going to talk about them. Here we go. This is from Jim Kerr from Simple Minds. He says this: back in the 80s, we were trying to create a kind of European sound, cinematic and emotional. Bobby Gillespie from Primal Screen, he says, in Scotland, there was always this feeling that you had to create your own world. Stuart Adamson of Big Country says, the idea was to make the guitar sound like bagpipes, something unmistakably Scottish. Eddie Reader says this: there was melancholy in Scottish music, but also humor. And we're going to wrap it up with Roddy Frame from Aztec Camera. And he says this: Glasgow gave you toughness, but music gave you escape. There you go. My name is W, host of this podcast feature known as Surprise Cast. Check out the Bluebells' new album, 16 glorious tracks, over 50 minutes of wonderful music that you'll want to hit repeat once it's over. And head on over to their website, check out any tour dates, grab their album, all good. But remember this, everyone. Great, harmonic, melodious music is all around us. All you have to do is keep your ears open. Ciao.
Say it,